Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to day 11 of Qur'an Journaling. Today we are going to be journaling Ayat number 12. I've got my supplies here ready to go and I'm going to take you through each one and explain how I'm using these resources. This is my Qur'an notebook. It has the Qur'an on one side and blank pages on the other side so that you can write your notes, and I have been doing that extensively during these lessons. I also have my Ibn Kathir Tafsir, and this has made a really great resource. It's not as thorough as some of the online resources that I have, which you can find down in the description box below. And I have my word-for-word Qur'an, which I'm using as well, both for the translation as well as the Arabic, and my favorite part, the word-for-word translation. And here is the notebook that I'm actually going to be writing in. These are just blank pages made from drawing paper that I had bound at an office supply store. I'm going to be using this to write my notes and do my drawings. So the first thing I'm going to do is add another page to my Qur'an notebook. I'm using some tracing paper and I'm just taping it in, and that way I can write my notes on top of the previous notes that I've taken. I'm finding that for these passages, I need a lot more space to write my notes, and adding these sheets of paper in is just perfect. That way I have just enough for what I need and it's not too excessive. So I'm going to start writing a few things here. I'm writing the Arabic word for maybe about 3 words that I want to dive into a little bit more and understand a little bit more. And so the first word has to do with raising the youth up from their sleep. So ayah number 12 in English is, "Then we raised them up from their sleep, that we might test which of the two parties was best at calculating the time period that they had tarried." So ba'athnahum is we raised them. And I spent a little time trying to understand this word because in different resources, it is, or rather, the root word is used in different areas in the Quran and in other areas. And it has a meaning that's even more than raising up from sleep. And we learned that the youth were asleep for a very long time, more than 300 years. And when you are sleeping for that long, which of course, that's not possible, today, this was a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when you are being awoken from that sleep, you're really being raised up, being brought back to life. And so the word itself can be used, for instance, if a civilization or a nation has crumbled or died and it's being raised back up, that's almost like being raised from the dead. So the word itself can be used, it's a deeper, more powerful word to be raised back up from the dead. I did include a couple other words as well that I wrote in the notebook that I ended up also transferring into this journal as well. And one of the things that I was trying to figure out what to illustrate was what this ayah was talking about, or was I guess it was sharing a conversation between the youth. So we're getting this little recording that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has recorded this interaction with the youth when they woke up or raised back up rather. They had a little discussion, a little argument, a little bit of bantering of how long they had actually slept. And the sun had traveled across the sky. Of course it had many times because it had been hundreds of years, but for them it felt like they had just slept a short while. And we're reminded that when death comes to us and then we are raised back up on the day of judgment, we will be saying, it felt like we only slept for a night or a part of a night. And that's when I hear this discussion with the youth, it's reminiscent of what will come to all of us when we are raised back up from the dead. And so because they had slept for enough time where the sun had traveled across the sky, they either came into the cave and it was night and then the sun was up when they woke up, or it was afternoon and the sun was still out and then they woke up, it was night. It was enough time had passed. They were asleep for over 300 years. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have raised them back up at the same period of time in the day where they would have thought like no time had passed even though they had slept. But they could tell that time had passed. And so they argued about it, how much time had passed in their youth. And so you could imagine that they're getting riled up about this when it's kind of something basic and they're just arguing about it. And so my drawing is depicting, I wanted to depict time passing, and I was trying to figure out how to do that. I was thinking maybe literally showing the planet and, going around the sun. And then I opted for imagery that I found really beautiful and that you have seen now in 3 of the previous entries. And that's just basically a sunset that is, you get to see all of the colors of the rainbow in the sky as it's going from daytime, dusk into nighttime. And it's one of the most beautiful times of day, at least for me, that I love to look at the sunset and the colors in the sky. And each night it's a little bit different, especially if you have some great clouds. You can really see some beautiful colors in the sky. It's not like that year round, but at this moment it is for us. And I decided to draw that because for me, that feels like time passing. It's when the sun is literally setting, it's a very quick process. And so for me, doing the sunset felt like time passing, and also that period of time when they had entered and woken up and they could tell that the sun had passed across the sky. And then below I wrote the phases of the moon, and I had flipped my page over so that I could have better control in drawing it. And I actually regret doing that. I should have kept my page upright because the way I would have drawn the crescent moons would have been more towards the center of the page rather than outward, because it looks like it's upside down versus it looking like I had drawn it in the correct way. So if you're copying this drawing, then I would just recommend that you don't flip your page over when you are drawing it. And so the content for this, I had actually intended to do Ayat 12 and 13. And once again, I had more thoughts than I could just contain. And so I ended up just doing Ayat number 12. And so I go into 2 other words. One of the words was referring to choosing one of the youth to actually go out and get food. And so I talked about that as well, because that word specifically refers to someone who has the intellect to go out and figure things out without being told or given too much instruction. And then the last word I used was regarding the 2 parties, Hizbaini. And I included that one too because there's a lot of discussion on which 2 parties it actually was or referring to. And because when the Quraysh went to the Jews of Yathrib to ask them about the prophet and to inquire about prophets of the book, the Jews told the Quraysh to ask about 3 things, and one of them was the people of the cave. And so when these ayahs, when the surah was revealed, and this ayah about the 2 parties, the discussion came about which 2 parties it might have been, and it could have also been the 2 parties of the Jews and the Christians, because the sleepers of the cave, the people of the cave, is in both of these religions, and there are disputes about how long they actually slept. And so when this ayah is saying that so that we may, they were raised up so that then we can tell like how long they slept, because they argued about it, which 2 parties were correct or which one of the 2 parties was correct. It could also mean that it was, the Jews versus the Christians, which of them were correct. It could also mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds that knowledge, and that's one of the parties, and all of creation is the other party. So many scholars have different interpretations of what the 2 parties mean, and because the Prophet ﷺ did not comment on this specifically, it is open to discussion based on evidence. You could have different interpretations of it, which is a really beautiful way to examine this ayah. Okay, so this is the completion of this page. I hope that you enjoyed this look at Qur'an journaling for Surah Kahf for Ayat 12. I hope that you're enjoying this series and I hope that you are following along. And if you are, please tag me on Instagram. I would love to see your work. Don't forget that you can check out the blog post that accompanies this video for links to all of the materials that we're using. The video playlist that I am referring to is also listed in the description box below. And if you'd like to see how we're Qur'an journaling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.